We're down to 2 divisions left to wrap up the division previews, which can only mean one thing, Yanni. Like, the actual games are in sight.
Yeah, catching some of this preseason here, get a little bit of the juices flowing, seeing what's happening. It's good stuff, good time.
Yeah, I haven't put any of this out there because I have no confidence betting preseason, but I've actually made money because I've just been betting unders like crazy.
Yeah.
Like, almost every game, I just bet the under. So
it's crazy. I think it was 20 out of 24 of the games went under in the first two real weeks of preseason, which is crazy. It's like in most of these we're sitting around 38 roughly for an over under.
Even down to like 34.5 in some of them.
Yeah, and it was like that, and of course it only covered by 1.5. But it was like when I saw these trends and I saw the Cowboys and Raiders preseason game at 40.5, I'm like, I gotta pound that under, So
it's like a regular season total at 60 or something.
I know. It barely got home, but it did get home. So to your point,
totally.
Whatever, we'll make a few extra dollars. Get ready.
Try to ride it and get a little more to bet heading into the season. So
for sure.
Well, hey, a couple things before we jump, and we will just jump in here quick, but subscribe to the channel, like the video. It's not that hard. Just takes you a second. Also, we have division previews up for most of the other divisions, and so you can go back on the channel and check those out if you have not done so already. Get all prepped for the NFL season. Tonight, we're jumping into what should be a pretty fun and competitive division with the AFC North. So we're going to kick it off with the Baltimore Ravens. Second year for Todd Monken. They're 13-4 last year. I have their strength of schedule at 13th. So, in the middle-ish. Under 10.5. It's slightly juiced to the over at -122, plus 103 to the under, and they're at plus 145 to take home the division crown. Can Baltimore come through and be on top in the division this year, Yanni?
Can they? Yes. Will they? We'll see.
Will they?
Yeah, well, we'll see.
I'm looking for a promise here, Yanni, one way or the other.
Well, if you're going to make any promises, I would have to say, as a rule, the AFC North would probably not be the division to do that with. I think that all 4 of the teams in this division are good. And even the 4th place team, I think, is going to be a quality team, which I'm sure we'll get to here. When I look at this Ravens team, they're very similar to last year, right? I mean, they should be a very similar team. You mentioned they won 13 games last year. They had a legitimate shot to get to the Super Bowl. I don't, we've talked about this on some of the other division previews. I don't know that this Ravens team got a lot better this season going into the season, whereas a lot of other teams did. Obviously, the big addition is Derrick Henry, and, we'll see what that can do. I mean, Derrick Henry's as good of a running back as we've seen in the last 8 years, right? I mean, in the last 2 decades, really, he's as good as we've seen. Does he have some juice left? Probably. He's still probably got a little bit there, and I think in this offensive system, he could thrive. I mean, we'll see. It'll also be interesting to see, one thing the Ravens have traditionally done is they are very much a running back by committee team. But they've also, in the last handful of years, they have not really had that bell cow, super productive running back. So, I'm interested to see, is Derrick Henry going to get 75% of the snaps there, or is it going to be more of a committee thing? I mean, we'll find out on that. Obviously, there's a lot of potential there. I mean, when you look at that offense, you've got the 2 tight ends that we know are both very good. Zay Flowers proved to be very good in his rookie year. If they can get anything from Rashad Bateman, I mean, even Nelson Aguilar put up some nice games last year for them. Offensively, they're good. Now, their offensive line looks a little bit different this year. I would say not majorly concerned about that, but I think something to watch at least. I don't think this line is going to be as good as it was a year ago. And, they were, to be honest, I mean, I don't know that they were great a year ago. I think they were good, if, average to good, I guess, if you were kind of ranking them there. This year, I mean, they look like a very average group to me, at least on paper. But when you can run the ball, when you have a quarterback that can, be elusive in the pocket there, you can cover up for a lot of that. I mean, I think that's where some of this is changing in the NFL in general. Some of these teams that maybe don't have great offensive lines are still able to be semi-productive, in the Ravens case, very productive, because their quarterback can make plays, because they have guys that can run the football. So, when I look at that, that's kind of where I see them on offense. On defense there, I think their defense is good. I don't think it's great. And when I look at it there, they had some nice things. You know, they brought Matabuke back, which is obviously a big signing. You know, they invested in the cornerback position in the draft there. So, you know, they have good players on this defense. They actually have a lot of good players on this defense. But, you know, outside of a few players, it's very much a mediocre unit to me when I look at it here. And I think losing guys like Patrick Queen, I mean, and I don't think Patrick Queen was necessarily a world beater on defense there, but I think he was a key contributor on that defense there. And, you know, you look at guys like Marlon Humphrey, he hasn't been the player he's been since his first couple years in the league when he was, you know, younger, healthier, that kind of a thing. So I don't necessarily love this defense, and I worry a little bit about their pass rush. Now, they do some creative things on defense. They get the safeties up. They'll blitz corners. They do a lot of different things, but they don't necessarily have those like just dominant edge rushers that, at least in my opinion, and not that a guy like Jadeveon Clowney was necessarily that guy last year, but he helped him and played well last year. And you know, you kind of look and you're like, are they going to be able to generate a good pass rush? I think they'll be pretty good against the run. So, you know, that's a very lengthy way of saying, I think we're going to see a lot more of the same from the Ravens, you know, from last year to this year. Do I think they're going to win 13 games? I don't. And it's because I think their competition is going to be a little bit better. And I'm with you. I have their schedule at 14. So I'm one different from you on that. You know, so we're pretty close there. But I just think when you look at that AFC North, I think last year, of course, when Burrow went down, you know, you get the Bengals there. Obviously, the Steelers were having quarterback issues, you know, whatever. We'll get to them. I think it's going to be a little bit tougher for them this year, but I do think that they're rightly favored. And I will say that from a betting perspective, there's almost nothing I like with this Ravens team, because I think, you know, if I'm looking at it, 10.5 wins seems spot on. The number to win the division at plus 145 seems probably right around where it needs to be. So there's really nothing that jumps out to me. I do have one question, though, as I turn the Ravens over to you. As I was looking at some different betting angles here, Lamar Jackson is plus 1,800 to win MVP. And, you know, when you look at that, you got guys like, you know, CJ Stroud and, of course, Joe Burrow and the usual candidates of Mahomes and Allen. And you got guys like Aaron Rodgers, but they're all more likely to win the MVP, which I find interesting. You know, I don't know if that's a voter fatigue thing where it's like, we won't give it to the same guy twice or, you know, one of those kind of deals. But, you know, I just find it interesting. Like, that seems like a really, really low number to me for, you know, a guy that just won the MVP, who, again, I see more of the same from this year. Maybe with Derrick Henry, maybe that changes a little bit, but I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. But other than that, to be honest, I have not a lot of value to bring with the Ravens here, because I think that, you know, they're, to me, out of the four teams in this division, I think they're the easiest to peg. And I think that Vegas or the sports books have pegged them pretty darn accurately, in my opinion.
All right. I think we're pretty similar here. The more that I've sat with this division, it's interesting because I think across the board, all these teams have reasons to feel like they could be pretty good, but I think that there can be some concern, more concern with some teams than others, as we'll get to, but I think there can be some concern with all of them. And the Ravens are no different to me. You know, I went into this feeling high on the Ravens, and certainly I think they'll still be good. But I'm going to go along with what you said, and I think if anything they got, maybe a little bit worse. I mean, adding Derrick Henry is nice, and I actually think he could potentially have a really good year. I think you nailed the thing to watch, which is what kind of workload does he get compared to in the past? And I'll get to that more in a second. But one of the things that really stuck out to me here was just the loss of veteran depth. Yeah. Like, and you named a number of the guys already. But just going through here, none of these guys are world beaters. None of these guys would you be like, oh my gosh, we lost that guy.
Right.
But when you add them all up and you lose Odell Beckham, Jadeveon Clowney, Ronald Darby, J.K. Dobbins, who's been hurt, so they didn't have him, right? But Devin Duvernay, not great, but can be like a third receiver, stretch the field for you. Gus Edwards, who's been a workhorse for them. I think a big one, honestly, is Tyler Huntley. He's no world beater. But now if Lamar goes down, they have Josh Johnson back there, and I think that's some trouble for them. Where Huntley at least could come in and kind of keep the ship above water for a few games. And so Lamar, I think, really needs to stay healthy this year. They lost some on the offensive line, a few guys there that are some depth. Geno Stone, Rock Yassin. Again, none of these are world beaters, but I just named about 15 veteran people that they lost.
Yep.
What did they add? Derrick Henry, Josh Jones, Chris Board. I don't even know who these guys really are. And then a couple draft picks.
Yeah.
So I think this team got thin. And I think that could really be problematic. When you look at their starting roster, I do have some concern about the offensive line, just as you said. They won't be bad by any means, but I think they could be below the midpoint in the league this year.
Yeah, very fair.
Now, Derrick Henry's been running behind one of the worst lines in the league in Tennessee for a while, so it'll still probably feel better to him. And like you said, Lamar is elusive, so that helps them. I think their weapons are fine, though they don't blow me away. I love Zay Flowers. Mark Andrews is getting older. He's still going to be good. Tight ends can play for a while. I'm not saying he won't be good. Isaiah Likely is good, but I don't feel blown away. I don't have any trust in Rashad Bateman. And so when I look at this team overall and think about them as a contender, I mean, certainly they obviously are a contender. They're the favorite to win the division. But to go to the Super Bowl and things, I don't feel super high on them. So I have them winning 9.9 games. And so at plus money under 10.5, I haven't bet it. And again, what I'm doing more with betting now is I'm looking for my handful of very best bets and just investing in those the most. This probably isn't one of my very best bets to go under. But man, I don't mind the under in a tough division with a team that I think if they sustain a few injuries could be in some trouble this year.
Yeah, I didn't really bring the depth up. It's funny because I'll talk about depth on one of the other teams in the division here, but I did feel the same way. And really for what you said, it's like when you look at those pieces individually, I think you said it great. When you look at those pieces individually, you're like, okay, so what? This guy's not here. But when you add them all up, like you said, it's like, wow. And then, you mentioned they didn't really bring anyone in. It's like Josh Jones. Okay, he's going to come in and play on the offensive line. The guy's started 3 games in his NFL career. Like, do we know what we're getting here? I mean, he, by all accounts, he looked good when he played in Houston last year. Okay, fine. 3 games. Like, is he going to be, we'll see. So I hear you on that. And you're right. I think that, especially on the defensive side of the ball, a couple injuries there to some key guys, they could be in trouble.
Yeah. I will say one bet that I thought was interesting, and this is honestly a honorary Yanni bet, if anything, because I know you were on it last year, but it is interesting at least to think about Derrick Henry's over for rushing yards. It's I didn't look at every book. I only looked at FanDuel, but it was 950.5 at even money, basically. Mm-hmm. And you look back at the last 5 seasons, 1167, 1538, 937. So that one was just under 2027, 1540, right? So when he's playing, he's destroying that.
And the 937 was in 8 games because remember he missed the second half of that season.
Yeah, so, right.
He was on pace for 2,000 yards there when he was
when he's playing, he's going way over. So to your point, maybe he gets less carries, but he hasn't even been flirting with the 950.
I know, and I kind of felt the same way, and I didn't bring it up only because of that unsurety of how many touches is he going to get, but I saw the same thing. I'm like, this guy's an automatic 1,000 yards. I mean, he really is, but we'll see. I am curious to see how much usage he gets.
This is what I'm going to keep thinking about because I don't think because even if he doesn't get the usage, and I know we just said that this line isn't as good, but he's had the least yards before contact in the league for years, and he's doing that. If he even just gets another half yard or yard before contact, it's given him a little bit more space to work. He's not going to need the same number of carries to get there.
I can tell you this: if you said bet this, I would bet the over 100 times out of 100. I can tell you that much. Yeah.
I might have to do a little something with that. We'll see. I don't have many player props yet, so I should get a few. It'd be fun. All right. Anything else on the Ravens before we move on, Yanni?
No, I am curious though, just on that Lamar MVP take. I mean, does that number, like, why is he so much further down than some of those other guys?
Well, here's what I do wonder, and I maybe you have this in front of you, but how frequently does someone win the MVP 2 years in a row? Because it's like Kevin Stefanski is way, way low for Coach of the Year, but it's
Right,
like, well, he's not going to win it again, you know?
right, right, right.
That would be the only thing I would say, because Lamar is definitely a very high ceiling guy, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
if you get him healthy and playing well, you would think he's in the conversation, because if the Ravens are successful, Lamar is successful.
Right, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that says something about where the sports books see the Ravens overall. Because if we said, "Hey, we think this Ravens team is a number 1 seed or a number 2 seed," I feel like Lamar's got to be in the top
Yeah,
3 or 4 for
I agree.
MVP there. You know,
Yeah,
and
I
the fact
agree.
that he's down at 10th or whatever, he is with guys ahead of him, it's like I said, like you said, is it a back-to-back thing, voter fatigue? Is it, maybe the Ravens aren't going to be as good? And I mean, if Lamar does what Lamar did last year, but they're the 6th seed, let's say, is he winning MVP? Probably
He's
not.
probably at least in the conversation. And part of how MVP goes is who finishes strong in the last 4 or 5
True.
games, right? Like,
True.
he
Yeah.
doesn't even have to be amazing the whole season. He just has to carry him to the playoffs and be
Right.
incredible for the last few games, and then he's in the conversation.
Yeah. No, true.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely don't hate it. I haven't gotten involved with MVP at all, but that makes sense to me. He certainly could be in that conversation. So, one other thing that I didn't mention is, just in terms of potential regression candidates, they did have a plus 12 turnover differential last year as well,
Mhm.
which is a pretty wide margin. And maybe that defense can do it again, but that's a huge help to get to 13 wins.
They're traditionally one of the better teams at forcing turnovers. Now whether or not the offense takes care of the ball, we'll see on that. But I also think, to the point where without those game wrecker, pass rushers and that, will they be able to get those turnovers, or will they have that regression on the turnover? And I mean, something to watch for sure.
Yeah, something to check out.
Yep.
All right, well, let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals, who are the second best odds to win this division. Brian Callahan's moved on to Tennessee, so they promoted Dan Pitcher, who I know nothing about internally. 9-8 last year, but obviously that was without Joe Burrow. I have strength of schedule as 23rd. Over under 10.5, minus 120 to the over, so it's pretty close to even, and plus 165 to win the division, so 20 cents different than the Ravens. Obviously, the books are seeing the Bengals as a team that should be very similar to the Ravens and be fighting for that first place spot. Is that how you see them, Yanni?
Yes, but I'm going to definitely give you a caveat here with this one. This Bengals team, to me, I mentioned that I thought the Ravens were probably the easiest team to peg in this division, in my opinion. I think the Bengals are the hardest, when I look at it here, because I think that their floor and ceiling are very far apart. I mean, I don't see this team being 9-8 again at all. I mean, I think that one of two things is going to happen here. This team is either going to be really, really good, and they're going to be a 13-4 team like the Ravens were a year ago, or they're not. Maybe Burrow isn't healthy, that kind of a thing, and they end up worse than they were a year ago, to where they kind of falter and become that 6-11, 7-10 type team. Now, I will say this: I'm going to assume, based on the very little bit I saw in preseason and that Burrow's healthy. And with that, I'm going to assume that they are trending towards the high end of that ceiling. So I actually think, as of today, and again, this is hard because I think they're extremely volatile. I think the Bengals win this division, if you ask me that today. When I look at it here, and it's not that I necessarily think they're so much better than the Ravens or, the Browns or the Steelers or that. I think that there's a couple things that when I look at it here that I really like about this team. Number one, if Burrow's healthy, I think they have the best quarterback in the division. No slight against Lamar. I mean, obviously he's a great player, but I think Burrow's the best quarterback in this division. I also think they have the easiest schedule by far in this division. And we've talked about that a lot. I mean, when you are playing lesser teams, and I mean, essentially, when you look at the Bengals schedule, they've got outside of the division, obviously in the division, these teams are going to beat up on each other. We know that. Outside of the division, they have like 3 what I would call difficult games. The rest are, there's no such thing as easy in the NFL, but games they should, potentially be able to win without too much trouble if they're healthy and whatever. So I think this Bengals team has a lot here. They did a couple things that I really, really like this offseason. Obviously, keeping T. Higgins was huge. This offense goes with Chase and Higgins. I mean, that's where it is. I think if one of those guys is out, there's a problem. As long as both are on the field, I think this offense can be as dynamic as any in the league. But I really like 2 things that they did. On offense, I like that they continued to try to address the offensive line. That was an area that they still struggled with last year. They brought Trent Brown over from New England. He didn't play great a year ago, but he's a veteran guy who in his career has been a solid performer. They drafted a guy, I'm not going to claim that I know much about Amarius Mims, but, they drafted him with their first round pick.
You play tackle at Georgia, you're probably decent.
That's what I'm saying, right? So he's got to be all right. So they're trying to address those areas of need, with potentially contributing players. But I really like on the defensive side of the ball, when you look at where that defense fell off from 2 years ago, it was the safety position. Jesse Bates and Von Bell, when those guys left, they were so disorganized in that secondary all year last year. And it's like they never got it figured out. So what do? They bring Geno Stone in, kind of a double win for them there. They bring in a veteran guy that can play. But then they also brought Von Bell back. Now, I've never been a huge Von Bell guy in the sense that he's like a supremely talented athlete and a great safety, but he's very cerebral back there when you would use that term. And he's kind of the guy that helps line things up back there. So I think that secondary gets tremendously better. And again, not that Von Bell or Geno Stone are the greatest players in the NFL. They're not, but I think when you put that veteran presence back there, it makes a huge difference. We know that if they can stay healthy, their defensive ends can get after the passer. They've got a little bit of depth at the linebacker position. So I feel like their defense is going to be better than it was a year ago. So if Burrow can play a full season here, there's no reason to me why this team isn't winning 12 or 13 games. I mean, I like them to win this division. So, I'll say that there. Now, I don't know that I love this bet just for the reasons of what I said. There's some volatility there. But I do think that there's some value there if you're willing to kind of take a chance with a team like that. And I have one other bet, and if you want, I can save it till your breakdown.
Go for it.
It's a player prop. I didn't talk about the running back position. Joe Mixon went on. They brought Zach Moss over. I like Zach Moss's under on rushing yards here at 750.5. And I think that, Zach Moss, he had a couple really nice games with the Colts. I mean, he had a couple like 200-yard games last year, whatever. I don't think Zach Moss is a great running back. I think he's actually very similar to Joe Mixon. And you could say, well, Joe Mixon had 1,000 yards. I don't think they're going to workhorse him the way that Joe Mixon did. He's going to be in a platoon with Chase Brown there. And I think that Chase Brown's actually going to be the leading rusher for this team. He's got the explosiveness. When he gets in there, things happen. I would not be surprised if Zach Moss, kind of gets some of those goal line carries, those first down carries, those short yardage carries. I don't think he's putting up 1,000 yards. I really don't. So I think when I look at that under 750.5, I'll take the under on Zach Moss's rushing yards.
Johnny, I love when this happens. I don't know if you can see this, but which way do I go with my camera?
There you go.
Zach Moss under 725.5 is what I found. Not even 750. I didn't go look for the best line.
Yeah, there you go.
And honestly, very similar to what you said, I definitely see Chase Brown probably ending up with even a little bit more of the workload than Zach. And Zach Moss is a fine running back. Like, I actually think he's a fine platoon guy.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's going to get to 750 yards in this offense. They're going to be throwing a ton too, I think.
Right.
So yeah, I like that under as well. That was the player prop I had written down. I don't know that I have too much to add here. I think what you said, I'm on board with. I think Joe Burrow is great. I just kind of need to see it again. And I know that he should be all the way healthy again now. But yeah, I just want to see it again. I just don't feel confident in this team. Another narrative-y thing, which probably won't turn out this way, but is I've heard that T. Higgins has not been very invested in practices and stuff, and I don't think he liked the way things went down with being franchise tagged and all. Now, does that mean he's not going to go out and play hard? No, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But you do just wonder if he's like discontent, is he going to bring his A game to the table? There's no way to know that for sure. But I think because of that, there's some question marks. And then also, you talked about it with the secondary being better. And I do like the defensive line here, but the defensive backfield to me is just kind of okay. And kind of okay is enough if Burrow can be an MVP candidate kind of Burrow, because they'll score a lot of points. So they won't need the defense to be amazing. But I'm not pumped about this defense is the other thing that I would say. Aside from that, this is a team I feel like I don't have a great read on and feel less strong about than the Ravens and some of the other teams that we're going to look at. I think they're probably priced about right. I have them winning a little bit under 10 games, but to me, I don't feel like I have a real solid handle on how this season is going to go for the Bengals.
Yeah, again, I think for me, when you look at that 10.5 wins, I can see this team winning 13 games. I can see this team winning 7 games. So,
Yeah,
you split the difference there, right? I mean,
I
I don't know. Yeah, I think they're definitely going to be one of the more intriguing teams to watch this year because, again, I think we know with Baltimore what we're getting. We're going to see a lot of what we saw a year ago. And with Cincinnati, I think it's going to go one direction or the other. We're either going to see like, wow, this Bengals team is really playing well and they're really good, or, oh, man, this is falling apart for them.
Yeah. What you said about, I was just looking at what you said about the schedule. I won't read through the whole thing, but just to underline what you were saying, I mean, when you get New England, Washington, Carolina, the Giants, Vegas, okay, Chargers, maybe okay, Tennessee, Denver, like
Not
you're
great.
right. You're
Not
right.
great.
Out of division, it's not too tough. So
a lot of games
that
should
could be
win.
a big deal for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the two teams that I imagine we have a little lower. We'll see. They certainly are lower by Vegas standards. The first one is the Cleveland Browns. Kevin Stefanski leading them again. Last year, 11-6 with a whole slew of quarterbacks, including an old Joe Flacco leading the charge at the end of the season. Deshaun Watson throwing 10-yard passes about 4 yards and bouncing them halfway to the receiver. He's back making hundreds of millions of dollars, which I'm sure we'll get into. Over under here. Oh, I have their strength of schedule as 12th, which for me is second hardest in this division by a good bit. Over under 8.5, minus 135 to the over. So juiced a little bit toward the over here, and plus 550 is what I found to win the division. Yanni, it feels like a lot rises and falls on Deshaun Watson here. Do you think that's the case, or where do you see this team landing depending on how he plays?
It's all Deshaun Watson. I mean, let's be honest here. I think there's 2 question marks that I have on this team. I guess 3, if you want to say, will we see Nick Chubb and what will he look like returning? That's interesting. But really, obviously, Deshaun Watson is the big question. But the other question that this team has is, can they stay healthy? And here's why I say that. I mean, we could say that about any team, but I think the Browns starting 22 is as good as any in the league. I really do. I think their starting lineup is excellent. I don't think they have depth on the offensive side or the defensive side of the football. So, I look at their offensive line is great. I think that, and I won't say they have no depth because they have DeJuan Jones behind the tackles there, but realistically, there's such a drop off, if those guys go down. Same thing on the defense with guys like Myles Garrett. And obviously, you're never going to replace a guy like Myles Garrett if he goes down. But when you look at that defense, that starting defense is really, really good. When you look at the guys that are backups there isn't a lot there. That roster thins out real fast. And, I don't know if that's part of the makeup of this team to where, hey, they are paying Deshaun Watson a lot of money. They're paying Amari Cooper. They're paying Myles Garrett. Like, maybe you just have whatever's left as far as your fill out the roster guys. If they stay healthy, it won't matter, but it's hard to stay healthy for an entire season in the NFL. So that to me is where I get nervous on this Browns team, is like, if they lose a couple key players, how's this team looking? So let's put that to the side and let's talk about Deshaun Watson now. Watson, anybody should be able to pilot this offense. I mean, I really believe that. I think we saw that with Joe Flacco. I mean, does anyone really believe Joe Flacco was just an amazing quarterback last year? He looked pretty good. Why? Because they can block pretty well. They weren't running the ball particularly well, obviously without Chubb, but they were able to throw the ball. I mean, good tight ends with Njoku. This offense, if Watson can be even half of what he was, because I don't think he's been half of what he was in Cleveland. To your point, you could say he's been one of the bottom 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the entire league when he's played in Cleveland.
Yep.
Can he get up to being the 15th best quarterback in the league? I mean, in Houston, he was a top 5 or 6 guy?
Yep.
I mean, realistically, can he be a top 15 guy? If he can, this team's going to be really good. Again, like to see what Nick Chubb can do. Obviously, being able to run the ball would help. Once Chubb went down last year, they didn't really have it. Of course, they also lost some linemen, that kind of thing. But, we'll see. I don't know. This is it for Deshaun Watson, I've got to believe, right? I mean, I don't know the full structure of his contract as far as when they could get out from under it. I want to say it was like 2026 was the first year they could reasonably get out from under it a little bit. But, regardless, this has to be it for him. I mean, if he can't do it, do we see Jameis Winston? I don't know. I mean, they brought him in, and I mean, we know Jameis can sling it. They got weapons. We'll see. So to me, that's what it all comes down to. I mean, on the defense, I like that they brought guys like Zadarius Smith back. Not a lot of flash signings, but they kept a lot of their key people. On the offensive side of the ball, I really believe, and look, he's bitten me, I think, every year since he's come into the league, so I should probably not even say this, but I really believe that the player with the biggest upside in the entire league this year is Jerry Jeudy. I really think that, this change of scenery, if it's ever going to click, it's going to be now. He's in a situation where Cooper's still there, obviously drawing a lot of coverage. He's still a legitimate wide receiver number 1, even though he's getting older. We know Njoku's, tying up the middle of the field there. Jeudy should be getting some good, solid, light coverage in this offense. I'm not going to take what they're doing in training camp with anything because we talk about that all the time. We see, he made a great catch in training camp. He's looked good in training camp, right? That's all I'm going to say. So we know coming out of the draft, he had the ability, he had the talent. If Jerry Jeudy can be the player that the Broncos thought he might be, or even something close to that, I think this offense could be really, really good. Again, if Deshaun Watson, now obviously Judy's success is going to be partially tied in with Watson here. So we'll see. So what does that come down to me? Here's where I land on the Browns here. I think that their value to win the division is the best by far. At plus 600, I mean, I don't understand. Like, to me, the Ravens, the Bengals, and the Browns are pretty darn neck and neck to me. So, the fact that the Ravens and Bengals are pretty close when you look at those division odds, how is Cleveland worse than, say, a plus 230 here? I don't get it. Like, I don't understand where plus 600 comes from. They proved last year they could get in the playoffs, right? And I mean, again, they did it with a bevy of PJ Walkers and Dorian Robinson Thompsons and whoever else they're throwing out there,
It was just terrible, by the way.
Yeah. So it's like, if Watson and Winston can't get this done. So I will say this, if you want to bet a division winner that has some payoff, I think the Browns are it. Out of all 8 divisions, to me, their number seems the furthest off as far as a division win. I think this number should be way different than that. At plus 600, I love it. And then the last bet that I have here is another under, and I mentioned him as a legit wide receiver 1. I think he is. I think wide receiver 1, Amari Cooper, under 1,000 yards, 1,000.5 yards here. And he's been a great player his entire career. I just think that, he is getting a little bit older. And I think that having Jeudy there with Watson as quarterback, I think we're going to see a little bit different offense here, a little bit more of that West Coast style. I don't think the targets may be there for Cooper like they were when he was kind of being force-fed some of that work. So I think he's another under in play there, even though I would say I would tread cautiously on that one only because his track record shows that he will get there.
Yeah. He does seem to just make it happen. He's not flashy and you almost don't even notice him. And then he's just putting up big games for sure. But I do agree about the offense probably looking a little bit different this year. So I was laughing a minute ago because just like the under for Zach Moss, I have written down the Browns are the best division value bet that there is given their line. So I have down implied probabilities of the lines and then what I put their percentage at to win the division, the implied probability of plus 600 is 14.29%. I have them at 25.69%.
Exactly.
So I have like an 11% value on that. And I do have the Bengals and the Ravens both over 30% to win the division, but the value isn't there given the lines.
No.
So I'm with you. I mean, I think this is competitive. Honestly, a big part of it to me is if you gave the Browns the Bengals schedule and the Bengals the Browns schedule, I would probably even make this bet because at that point I would think they're really, and I think they still have a chance. I mean, I like the coaching here, especially with Kevin Stefanski, another Viking who got away. But he's a solid coach, and I think he'll do what he needs to. I think the offense here, like you said, I mean, it's not anything new, but the quarterback is the question. When you look at, I mean, the running back, unless Nick Chubb can come back, is kind of meh. But Deontay Foreman is good enough, I guess. But then David Njoku, Amari Cooper, Jerry Jeudy, and Elijah Moore is your third wide receiver. Right. That is a good wide receiver group, a good tight end. So this is an offense that should be able to do a lot of damage, especially like you said, if there aren't injuries with that offensive line that ranks probably in the top 5 in the NFL.
Probably,
yeah. So, I mean, it's an offense that should be able to get a lot done. And if they can't, it is an indictment of Deshaun Watson. Not that he needs to be indicted anymore, just on or off the field, I guess. But I do think it is a bit of an indictment by the organization, the fact that they got rid of Joe Flacco and brought in Jameis Winston, who's probably something more like a low-end starter in the league and has some starting experience. They also brought in Tyler Huntley, who I talked about before as a guy who can kind of hold down the fort. You don't want him starting for a long time, but it's almost like they just brought in some guys being like, I don't know if Deshaun Watson's going to do shit. So we better have a couple guys in the wings who are able to play. And Jameis Winston makes a lot of mistakes, but you put him in a pass-heavy offense, and he's going to make some things happen too. Mm-hmm. So I think I know how much they're paying Deshaun Watson, but in the NFL, ultimately, you need to win. Yep. And I think if they get 4, 5, 6 games in and he looks like he did last season when he played, I think he could find himself on the bench again, and Jameis Winston might be in.
Yep.
So the other thing that's a little concerning to me with the Browns is just the way that their defense got run off the field when they were away from home last year. I mean, it was just almost incomprehensible that a defense that has that much talent just got absolutely destroyed away from home. So that is the other thing, is they need to shore that up. They can't go give up 30-some points every time they're not in Cleveland. And that defense has the talent to not do that, but they need to get a little bit steadier on the defensive side of the ball. But if they can do that, I think they're right in the running in this division.
I don't think we've ever seen in recent memory a defense that was so dominant at home and so pathetic on the road. I mean, it's crazy. Like, how can you be so good in your home stadium and so bad on the road? I mean, it's crazy.
Yep. One other stat I'm going to just throw out there. This is an interesting one on the turnover side of things. So they had a -8 turnover differential. They had 36 turnovers last year. But I had them at 6.12 wins over expectation based on their turnovers, which would say this is a team that could have been a lot better if they had just taken care of the ball a little bit. So I think there's a chance for some positive regression for them on that front as well.
Yep.
So, all right. I don't think I had anything else in terms of any player props or anything. So let's move on and wrap up this division with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are bringing in lots of interesting quarterback options for super cheap. Also, they get the vaunted Arthur Smith, obviously better as an offensive coordinator than as a head coach. Not hard to do. So we could talk about that, but coming in from Atlanta to be the offense. I guess when you had Matt Canada, you're just like, hey, we don't want to go from a 1 to an 8. We'll just go from like a 1 to a 4.
Yeah, right.
And that'll be better for us. So 10-7 last year. This is a team that just seems to put together wins no matter what the question marks are before the season. And it's an interesting thing again this year, Yanni, a team that maybe a ton isn't expected from, but Mike Tomlin just seems to get this team to be in contention year after year. A big thing here, I have them as having the most difficult schedule in the league. Yeah. So that is going to be something that they will have to face. I'll be curious to hear what you think. But Is this a Steelers team that's going to be in the mix again?
Well, I've got them with the fourth hardest schedule. So, obviously tough road to hoe there, when you compare it to the other teams in the division. Um, Here's kind of where I am with the Steelers. For years, I kind of dogged Mike Tomlin. I really
Yeah,
did. And somewhere along the way, probably when Roethlisberger was, fading out there at the end and he somehow kept winning, my perception changed. And I was like, this guy just figures out a way to freaking win games. And when we look at potentially how bad Kenny Pickett is, and I think, we're starting to see that he really probably has no business probably even being on a roster, let alone starting in this league. The fact that they were able to come away with 10 wins last year, I mean, it's nothing short of remarkable. It's really not.
agreed.
I mean, so I look at that because when I was kind of doing my breakdown, my initial thought was like, I don't love this quarterback thing, which we'll talk about here in a second, but I'm like, yeah, so that's going to hold him back. And then I'm like, well, damn, they made it work with Kenny Pickett, so it's
Yeah,
like,
not to cut you off, but I just got to say quick. I mean, I've been watching preseason. You maybe have been too, but against second stringers, he looks utterly incompetent. And I
I
thought the
know.
change of venue might help him out a little bit or something. That Pittsburgh was holding him back, but he looks so bad.
Yeah, it's pretty apparent he's not going to be able to play in this league. I
Yeah.
think that's pretty apparent. But yeah, anyways, getting back to Pittsburgh there. So here's kind of where I am overall with this team. I like their defense a lot. I think their defense improved last year. Their key on defense, obviously, is TJ Watt. I mean, you look at the numbers with Watt on the field versus without. He's as big of an impact defensive player as you can have. Bringing over Patrick Queen, I mentioned him with the Ravens, Deshaun Elliott. Those are nice additions. I think those help shore up that defense. And I think this defense is going to be pretty good because I think they've got, a kind of like the Browns, a very good starting 11. But I think unlike the Browns, they actually have a couple guys that they can rotate in defensively that'll make them, even better. So I like this defense a lot. The offense, I'm struggling here. And again, they made it happen with Kenny Pickett, which is why I'm not going to completely, brush the Steelers under the rug here. But here's kind of where I am. First of all, Russell Wilson is going to get benched in this offense. I have no doubt. If he starts week 1, which signs are pointing to that,
Like it, yeah.
it's going to be Justin Fields at the latest week 6. I wouldn't be surprised if it was week 4. I think that they're going to be in this back and forth QB mode all year, I think. And quite frankly, at this point, I don't think Russ has it anymore. And I've never really been a Justin Fields guy.
You have not.
So,
I can vouch for that.
So I don't think he's necessarily got it. I do think Fields, like most people, I think Fields should probably get the opportunity here because he has more upside, right? I think with Russ, we know what we're getting here. I think they'll give Russ a little bit of time, see what he can do. Probably will be a whole lot of 3 and outs is my guess, in which case, we'll end up seeing Justin Fields. So let's look at this team here. They've tried very hard to address the offensive line. Is the offensive line better than it was 2 years ago? Yes. Is it substantially better than it was 2 years ago? I don't know. They've tried, so it's definitely not due to lack of effort. I mean, they've invested draft capital there. They have free agents. So they're trying, but this offensive line just doesn't look great. It looks very, so we'll see how they do. Najee Harris is fine. I mean, he'll put up his 1,000 yards. It's a contract year. Maybe he'll do well. They got a big ding there in the preseason. Jaylen Warren had a hamstring injury. We'll see. I mean, hopefully he won't be out long, but I mean, that's a big deal to that offense because, I mean, honestly, he's probably the most productive player on that offense. They don't use Freiermuth the right way. I mean, they haven't been blocking when he should be out catching passes. I mean, I don't know. I just don't like, you kind of mentioned it with Arthur Smith too. Like, yeah, it's an upgrade. Anything's an upgrade from Canada, but how much of an upgrade? Kind of, it's kind of the same thing. Like, okay, it's a little bit of an upgrade, but how much? Same thing, with the offensive line. So, but here's where I think they're really screwed here is I think this wide receiver room is garbage, absolute garbage. I don't think that they have, be careful how I say this. I don't think they have a starting caliber wide receiver on this roster. George Pickens is obviously the wide receiver 1, and we've seen him make some of the most incredible catches that anyone's ever made. But the guy, he's a shitty route runner. I'm sorry. He drops easy passes. His head isn't always there. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, if he can get behind the defense and get that 70-yard touchdown, great. If he can't, what's he getting you? I don't know. I look at their number 2 receiver, who right now is Van Jefferson. Van Jefferson couldn't get it done with Sean McVay and Matt Stafford. He ain't getting it done with Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson. You know, I mean, that's not –
it's not a good trade.
No, and then you start looking, it's like they got what? Des Fitzpatrick, Scotty Miller, I think Quez Watkins is on there. I mean, it's like these are guys that they need to be way down on your depth chart, not guys that you're counting on to, you know, come in and make plays. So I think it's going to be hard for them to move the football through the air, in my opinion here. That's why I also think Fields needs to be the guy here, because he gives them at least, hey, no one's open. I can tuck the ball and run. Defenses have to maybe play a spy or maybe play a little bit of a zone and not man because of his ability to run. When I look at this offense, when I see Russell Wilson, I envision the old Russ throwing bombs to Tyler Lockett and Doug Baldwin and even DK Metcalf the last couple of years. There's no one on this Pittsburgh team that can do that. So to me, Russell Wilson's essentially worthless at this point. I hate to say that, you know, I mean, it sounds terrible, but that's kind of where I am on him. And then, like I said, I mean, Fields probably gives them a little better chance to win, move the ball, put points up, but I don't think Fields is going to be great either. So here's kind of where I ended up here. If it weren't for Mike Tomlin seemingly winning 9 or 10 games every freaking year, I would say that this team would win 5 games. I mean, honestly, but their defense, I think, is going to be very good. I think the big question is going to be, how does the defense keep their head in the game if the offense is 3 and outing and, you know, punting all the time and whatever? Are they going to be content trying to play 9 to 6 games? I mean, we'll see, right? Or if the other team gets up, are they going to be like, well, we're done? I don't know. We'll see. But I think that because of Mike Tomlin, you have to respect this team. And going into the season, I was higher on them. But as I look at them now, as I've watched Wilson and Fields, and I know it's just preseason, but as I've watched them look terrible out there, I just can't see this offense putting up enough points to compete with the Bengals and the Ravens and the Browns. And like you said, they've got a tough schedule outside as well. So all of a sudden, it's like, okay, where do the wins come from? Can they play enough close games where TJ Watt can get a strip sack at the end and they can win? I don't know. I mean, we saw last year the first, 8 weeks of the season. I mean, they were projected to win like 2 of those games and they won them all. You know, it's like somehow they kept winning. That's got to change, right? I mean, that can't go on forever. It just can't. So I don't think there's enough defense there. I don't think Tomlin or Arthur Smith can give them enough. I think that this team does finish 4th. I do think this team misses the playoffs. And the bets that I have on this team, there's a couple things here. First of all, it's not posted yet. It was posted briefly. If he's named starter and they put Russell Wilson's passing yardage up, you got to hammer the under. I mean, you have to, when it's posted. Right now, it's not up. It was up very briefly at 3,600. Okay. If that number hits, if he's announced week 1 starter and that number hits, whatever you are allowed to bet, you need to bet the under on that. I'm dead serious, man. I mean,
I know.
You have got to hammer that. So, I mean, that's the one bet I'm keeping an eye out for. I don't even know if the books will end up putting it up. If they do, I'm going to try to hammer the heck out of it there. But the other thing that I like on the bet here is I like the Steelers to miss the playoffs at -230. Now, that's heavy juice, obviously, when you're talking about 230. But I don't see any path for this team to get to the playoffs. And let me give you kind of another reason why I think there's some value here. If you go to the Steelers win totals, you can play some alt totals. You can play under 9.5 wins at -285. So obviously, if they're under 9.5, they're not making the playoffs with 9 wins in the AFC. That's not happening. So essentially, you're getting, 60 cents of juice there with that when you look at them to miss the playoffs. There's going to be 7 teams in the playoffs in the AFC. I don't see any path to where the Steelers are one of those teams. I just can't see it happening. I mean, it would take a slew of injuries across, the division and probably the conference for that to happen. This team is going to finish 4th. Tomlin will probably have them competitive. This defense will probably have them competitive. But this is a 6-11 team, and I think this might finally be the year that Tomlin can't overcome all the crap.
Yeah, man, you said it. Mike Tomlin's track record is also the reason that I would be very hesitant to bet any of the things that I think will be true about the Steelers. I have them projected for 7 wins, but that feels high to me, even especially as we talk through this. When you were talking about it, and I feel similarly about the offense, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but this almost feels like a team like the Jets were last year. Now,
Yes.
their quarterback play isn't going to be quite as bad as Zach Wilson because that's almost impossible. But it's a team with a good defense because I do think this is a good defense. They have some really top level players, and as we've talked about on other teams, even the ones who aren't big names are solid enough to be good NFL players. So I think this defense is going to be good, and that's going to keep them in games for a while. But when the offense goes 3 and out all the time, when they put you in bad positions, you can only hold up for so long. And that's what I mean about them being like the Jets. You joked about them playing in 9 to 6 games, but I think there's some reality there. Like, I think this is a team you're going to want to watch for unders. Maybe especially early in the year if the books haven't fully adjusted to how low scoring their games might be. Because this is a team that at their best is probably going to try to run the ball and then catch teams sleeping to throw the deep ball. And I'm a little bit higher on George Pickens than you are. I do think he's an NFL caliber receiver, but I don't think he's a dominant number 1 receiver. I do think that threat down the field is something that he can be, and maybe they can catch defenses sleeping here and there. But okay, they get one big play in a game. Like, that doesn't mean, even if they get a big play, they're probably not going to score a touchdown after it, right? Because they're not going to be able to punch it in. So I see this team being in low scoring games, good defense. The best they can hope for is to kind of control the clock. But man, I just think we've seen enough at this point to say, and I know I'm reiterating in some sense what you've already said, but this isn't going to work at quarterback. Now, is it way worse than Kenny Pickett? Probably not. And that should give us enough to say, like, okay, they can probably be competitive and be in games. But I think Russell Wilson's cooked, man. Yeah. Like, he just doesn't throw the ball the same way. He doesn't move the same way. He doesn't see the field the same way. I just think he's cooked. What you said about his passing yards under, if they post it, is amazing. Like, I hadn't thought about it yet, but I 100% agree. He is getting benched for Justin Fields at some point, partly because Justin Fields is so alluring. Like, the plays that he's able to make are unbelievable. The problem is he always makes mistakes. He always does something to screw it up. He's not accurate enough as a passer, but he is dynamic and he will do some amazing things. So I agree, man. I'm definitely going to, we need to stay in touch about that bet. If they post it, let me know and I'll do likewise.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
That's an awesome one. So, a couple other things that I had here, just 2 other things. This is gross. And I was too high on Najee Harris last year. And by the way, I'm not saying I think he's amazing, but over 850 yards when Jaylen Warren's already been hurt. This is a team that's going to need to be able to run the ball. I just think he's going to get enough volume that he probably gets there if he doesn't get hurt. So I don't know. I'm not pumped about it, but that's just one where
contract year too, which, he's playing for the rest of his career here. Yeah.
And I think he's decent, right? Like, I think he's an okay running back. So an 850 is not a huge number. Yep. The other thing is, if you do pay attention to like futures bets as you go through the season, I think this is a team where you could watch if they're able to get out to a decent start, that you bet their win total under if it jumps up a game or 2 early on, because just looking at their schedule, it's not cake, but they have Atlanta, Denver, the Chargers, Indy, Dallas is harder, but Vegas, the Giants, all that winnable before their bye.
Yeah,
right.
Winnable.
It's all like, not too bad. Like, they probably can go 500 or maybe even like 5-3 going into the bye. And then they get Washington coming out of the bye. Still very easy. But then it's Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Philly, Baltimore, KC, Cincinnati. Like,
yeah, their last half is brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like a string right there of like 1-7 to finish out the season potentially.
Yep.
So that's just another thing I'd pay attention to if their win total gets up to like a 9.5 or something to hit that under.
Yeah, or to your point there, I mean, if that line to miss the playoffs goes from
right,
whatever, it's like all of a sudden now you can get that, and knowing that, like you said, they're going to finish 1-7 down the stretch there for sure.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think looking at those last 8 games, if they went 2-6, that would be good for them.
I would agree. Totally agree.
So you can do some math when we're halfway through the season and see where that puts them. So
there you go.
All right. Anything else on the Steelers?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, as always, we will rank some stuff here, but please do remember to like the video. Go follow at Yanni_bet on X and at the Bet Crushers. As always, I will have all of those links in the description, so make sure you check them out as we get closer to the season. You're going to be following Yanni and also have betcrushers.com bookmarked so you can get all of his stuff. All right, Yanni, let's start out by ranking the coaches.
I'll say this. 4 pretty good coaches in this division. So this was not easy for me. Tomlin by far, and I think you probably picked up during my Steelers breakdown what he's been able to do. I mean, I've got him ranked first. I mean, I respect the heck out of that guy. And if you had asked me that 10 years ago, I would have been like, Tomlin's a joke. But I really he's earned my respect, so I've got him first. The rest were really, really difficult for me here. I went with Harbaugh second here. Difficult because sometimes I think Harbaugh can be a little overrated, but I also think there's something about his just kind of year in and year out, just kind of his demeanor. So I put him second there. And then this one may surprise you a little bit, but I actually have Zach Taylor third. And I went with Stefanski last. And look, I understand Stefanski's won awards. He's done some really good things. I'm not a Stefanski guy. I actually don't think he's a very good coach at all. I don't know. I think I'm in the minority there, but that's just my personal take and opinion.
I love it, Yanni. Bring the opinions. That's great. So yeah, my order is definitely, it's different. It starts the same. I have Tomlin number 1. And for me, that's largely a track record thing. Like he's just proven it over such a long period of time. Maybe I'm just going with former Vikings here, going with Tomlin. And then I have Stefanski second. I like what he brings to the table scheme-wise and just that leadership thing as a coach. I went with Zach Taylor third. This was a little bit iffy to me, but Zach Taylor's been growing on me. I feel like after maybe a rough start, he's starting to prove himself, and I think he's actually a pretty good coach. And then I have Harbaugh fourth just because I feel like he does some boneheaded things sometimes. He is a stable, good NFL coach. And like you were saying, I think all 4 coaches in this division are good. So none of these guys to me is a bad coach, but that was the order I went with.
Yeah, I think really quickly, I think you're right. Zach Taylor, he grew on me too. After that first season, it was like, he's going to hold this team back. But now when you really watch him, it's like, no, he kind of seems to know what he's doing out there. So, I think sometimes just like any job, you go into a job your first year. And I know obviously it wasn't his first year coaching, but his first year as a head coach, sometimes there's some learning, right? You got to figure some things out. And some people figure them out quickly. Some people it takes a little longer. And I think in Zach Taylor's case, it just took him a little bit longer, but he seems to have figured some things out now. I like what he does schematically. And like you said, he seems kind of like with Stefanski, he seems to be a good leader out there.
Yeah. I think so too. All right. I think these are going to be fun, man. I was thinking about the offenses and defenses. I'm like, this might be the toughest division we've had to rank some of this stuff.
I think so.
What do you have for the offenses here?
Well, so the first 3 offenses I think are really tough. Now I'm going to start backwards because I think it's pretty obvious I don't like Pittsburgh's offense. So
that is the easy one.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a huge gap between the other 3 teams in Pittsburgh here. The other 3 teams, I think it's close. I gave a ever so slight nod to the Bengals at the top here, and obviously that's going to be with a healthy Burrow. But assuming that offense is healthy, I just think that Chase, Higgins, with emphasis on that offensive line and that I give him a little bit of a nod. The next one was I think the toughest, and I went back and forth, but I went with Baltimore. It was really, really difficult because I love that starting lineup of Cleveland. But what I like about Baltimore is they have a little bit more depth. And of course, there's a little less question mark at the quarterback position. So I figured I'd slot them in second. The Browns, really because of Deshaun Watson, I've got as third. If he can come out and play, they could be the best offense in this division. We'll see if that can happen. So, and then of course, obviously, as I mentioned, the Steelers last.
Yeah, totally fair. I agree with all the points you made. I put Cincinnati first, mostly because of Burrow and those receivers. But for me, it was not clear either. But I did put them first. I went with Cleveland second, and my reason, not surprisingly, is I like the offensive line a lot, and
Yeah.
I really like their weapons, and I know that the quarterbacks, of course, I'd rather have Lamar Jackson than Deshaun Watson. Like, yes, there's no question that Baltimore has a better quarterback, but just across the board with the offense as a whole, I gave Cleveland the nod for second and Baltimore
Yeah.
third, and then
I was
put
close.
Pittsburgh dead last. Yep.
I went back and forth with those teams. I mean, I definitely think you could make the argument either way.
Those are the fun ones, honestly, to have to try to rank is when they're close like that. So, all right, were you close also on the defenses, Yanni? How'd you do that one?
I would say, so you said that these are the hard, like these four defenses. I mean, to me, there is razor thin of a margin between these as you can have. I mean, you could sell me on any of these. You really could. But here's kind of where I ended up. After much thought in my own debated head here, I went with Cleveland first. Now, to your point, on the road, I don't know, but I just
we're
think
ranking defenses at home.
well, for ranking them at home, definitely there's a no-brainer there. But I just think their starting 11 is so dynamically good, and like I like the way those puzzle pieces fit in terms of run stoppers, pass rushers, cover corners, safeties. Like they just have a great fix there. So again, a mystery to me why they can't put it together in the road there, but I don't think it's an issue of talent or anything like that. We'll see if they can improve there. But I got Cleveland first. I went with Pittsburgh second. They said I like this defense a lot. I think their starters are really good. I personally think TJ Watt's the best defensive player in this division. I think he's better than Myles Garrett. That's my opinion, for whatever that's worth. But I like Pittsburgh second. I went with Baltimore third. I gave them the slight nod over the Bengals, and I mean slight, only because I think of history. I think traditionally their defense has been good. I'm like you. I worry about it this year because I don't know that they have the game records and I don't know that they have the depth, like you said. But for now, until we see a little more out of the Bengals, I have them third, Bengals fourth. But I will tell you this. I think with the addition of those safeties, I think the Cincinnati defense could absolutely they could leapfrog Baltimore. I mean, they could leapfrog any of these teams. I think, again, these teams are all separated very narrowly here. And I think all four are good defenses.
I agree with you. I did slot Pittsburgh first, partly because of the history there, and because I think there's more consistency, which is sort of what you pointed to, right? I just don't trust Cleveland's defense as much, despite the wealth of talent that they have. But then I went Cleveland second. I had Baltimore third as well. I feel a little more confident putting them there, actually. Cincinnati is the defense I am lowest on in this division. It doesn't mean I think they'll be bad, but they're the one that I'm lowest on out of the four. And we'll see if they prove me wrong, which they very well might. All right, Yanni, last thing. What's the finishing order for the AFC North?
I'm going to go. So if you, this is so hard because here's the thing. I really, really, really want to go on a limb and say that Cleveland's going to win this division. But I can't do it. I just can't do it. So I'm going to go Cincinnati, Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh.
I'm going to go out on that limb, Yanni, even though, like I said earlier, if I go straight by percentages, but hey, we're having fun here. And I do have Cleveland being right in the mix with those other two teams. So I think we both think that these top three teams are all close. And just because of the upside on the whole team, other than the quarterback position, I'm going to pretend that they're going to get some decent quarterback play this year. And I'm going to go with Cleveland. And then I have Cincinnati second, Baltimore third, and Pittsburgh in fourth, which is the position I feel most confident about in this division.
So if just FYI for anyone listening, if you feel Baltimore is a third place team or, potentially behind Cincinnati and the Browns, you can get them to miss the playoffs. And I want to say plus 285. And honestly, I looked at it and considered it, but I still feel like this Baltimore team is going to find a way to get in the playoffs. So I have not bet it, but if you're thinking that they're going to be in third place, you can get a near 3-1 payout on that to miss the playoffs.
Obviously, way less volatility in picking someone to miss the playoffs. But I will say, too, if you think they'll finish third, like if you really do think Pittsburgh's last in this division, you can get plus 550 on them to finish third better in the division as
even
well.
Better.
So,
yeah, even better.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's a fun one, Yanni. We have just the AFC South left, which actually, unlike some previous years, I'm kind of looking forward to a lot. I think it's a pretty fun division this year. So
it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, it will, but man, fun teams to talk about. So we will be back with that most likely next week. Check out the other videos, Yanni. Thanks for jumping on and talking some football tonight.
Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate you having me.